The horse was long gone, swallowed by the white fury that ate the world. Seth did not know if it had been an hour or a day since he'd fallen from the saddle. He only knew the pain had turned from a hot spike in his side to a dull, creeping ice that was slowly claiming his legs. He was dying. The thought came without fear, only a flat, tired acceptance. It was likely what he deserved. The wind didn't just howl, it screamed. It was the voice of the boy he'd shot, the one who hadn't even been shaving yet. The cattle job had been simple. Push a small herd across the border for a cut. But the rancher's hands had been waiting. It was a setup, a bloodbath over 50 head of scrawny longhorns. Seth had fired into the smoke, and when the air cleared, the kid was on the ground, his eyes wide and empty, staring right at the man who'd killed him. Seth's own wound was the price, a bullet from the kid's father, maybe a just payment. He tried to rise, and the snow crust broke, plunging him waist-deep into a drift. The movement sent a fresh wave of fire through his ribs and down his left side. Delirium was fogging his vision. The pines looked like men, their branches like arms reaching for him. He was freezing, his blood leaking dark and slow onto the perfect, unforgiving white of the Montana Territory. He had maybe 30 minutes left, if he was lucky. 20, if he was smart and just lay still. He pushed forward, dragging his left leg. One step, then another. He was chasing nothing, running from a ghost. He fell, catching himself on his raw hands. The snow was packed with ice crystals that sliced his palms. He didn't feel it. He only felt the deep cold. The cold that was inside him now, in his bones. He'd lost his hat, his rifle, and his right to live. All he had left was the biting guilt and the six-shooter heavy at his good hip. He was a fool, a killer of boys, and he was dying in a ditch of his own making. He staggered on, his mind going dark and then sharp in flashes. He saw the flash of the muzzle. He saw the red splash on the kid's gingham shirt. He saw his own father, turning his back on him 9 years ago in Missouri. He stumbled over a root and pitched forward, his face landing in the snow. He lay there, breathing it in, letting the cold numb his lips. It was easier to stop. Just stop. But something hard jabbed him in the knee. Not a rock, not a root. He blinked, the snow melting on his eyelashes. He lifted his head, every muscle screaming. It was wood, a straight line, a piece of plank, gray and weathered, sticking up from the snow. He clawed at it, his frozen gloves finding another. A step. He looked up. Through the driving snow, a shape darker than the gray sky loomed. A roof, sagging in the middle like a broken-backed horse. A building. It was a miracle. Or a final, cruel joke. He dragged himself, using the buried step as leverage. He crawled the last 20 feet. The building was a ruin, a small, abandoned chapel, clinging to the edge of the mountain pass. Most of the front wall was gone, but a low door, battered and hanging from one leather hinge, was still there. The wind howled straight through the broken bell tower, making a sound like a mournful pipe organ. This was no sanctuary. It was a tomb, but it was out of the wind. He reached the door and pulled himself up. His vision was swimming. He put his shoulder to the rotted wood and fell inside, collapsing onto a floor of dirt and ice. The blackness took him for a moment. When his eyes focused, he saw fire. It was a small, weak thing, built in a ring of stones in the very center of the floor, right where the aisle would have been. The smoke rose up to the gaping hole in the roof, and beside the fire, a figure rose from a pile of furs. He thought it was an angel, then a devil. It was a woman. She moved faster than any woman he'd ever seen. In one fluid motion, she was on her feet and a rifle was at her shoulder. The barrel pointed square at his heart. "Don't move," she snapped. Her voice was low and rough, like sand on rock. Seth didn't have the strength to move. He just stared, propped up on one elbow. He could see her face now in the firelight. She was young, maybe 20, but her eyes were old and hard. Black hair, tangled and wild. A man's coat, sizes too large, over a dress that might have been fine once. It was stained and torn. "Who sent you?" she demanded. Seth tried to speak, His throat was frozen. He coughed, and a spray of blood hit the dirt floor. The rifle barrel did not waver. I said, "Who sent you? Was it Creed? Did that bastard send you to fetch me?" "No!" Seth rasped. It was barely a sound. "Nobody. You're lying. Nobody comes up here, not unless they're sent." He could see her finger tighten on the trigger. She meant to kill him. He didn't much care. "Just cold," he whispered. He tried to push himself up, to show he wasn't a threat, but the movement tore at his side. A groan ripped out of him, raw and involuntary. He slumped back, his head hitting the frozen earth. Lila watched him. Her eyes narrowed. She saw the blood on his coat now, a dark stain spreading from his side. She saw the gray color of his skin, the frost clinging to his beard. This wasn't one of Creed's men. They were hard, but they weren't half dead. This was just some drifter, shot up and stupid enough to get caught in a blizzard. He was a man, though, and men were trouble. Her first instinct was to shoot him and drag him back outside. It was cleaner, safer. She'd been here for 3 weeks, maybe 4. She'd lost count. She'd hidden from 2 patrols, eaten squirrels and bark, and kept this fire alive with wood from the pews she'd smashed. She had survived. She wasn't about to let this dying cowboy ruin it, but he groaned again. A low, pitiful sound. He wasn't a threat, he was a chore. She lowered the rifle, but kept it in her hand. "You bleed on my furs. I'll kill you faster than the bullet did." Seth blinked, trying to track her. She moved to him, kicking his boot. "Can you move?" He shook his head. She cursed, a short, violent word. She put the rifle down, but her hand went to her belt and pulled a long, mean-looking skinning knife. She knelt beside him. He could smell the wood smoke on her. And something else, soap, faint, but it was there. "If you're lying," she said, pressing the flat of the cold blade against his cheek. "If you've got one bit of strength left to try something, I'll cut your throat before you can blink. You understand me?" Seth managed a nod. The steel was cold, a shock against his burning skin. "All right." She jammed the knife back in its sheath. She grabbed the collar of his coat and dragged him. It was a painful, jarring ride across the dirt floor. He gritted his teeth until his jaw ached. She pulled him close to the fire, onto a thin, worn blanket. He lay there, gasping. The fire was so warm, too warm. It made his skin prickle and burn. "You're a fool," she muttered. Not to him, but to the fire, to the wind. "A damn fool, coming up here to die." She looked at his side. The coat was stiff with frozen blood. "This coat's coming off." She didn't wait for his help. She was strong. She rolled him onto his good side, her hands rough and impatient, pulling his arm from the sleeve. When she rolled him back, the world spun, and he cried out. "Be quiet," she snapped. "You want every wolf in the territory to hear you?" She ripped his shirt open. The wound was ugly, a dark, ragged hole, high on his left side. It was still leaking. She stared at it for a long beat, her face impassive. Then she stood, grabbed a small pot, and scooped snow into it from a drift that had blown in through the broken wall. She set it on the edge of the firestones to melt. Seth's eyes were closing. He was so tired. The warmth was making him sleepy, a dangerous, heavy sleep. "Hey," she said, and kicked his boot again. Hard. "Hey, cowboy. You don't get to die in here. I won't have it. I won't bury you." He opened his eyes. She was just a shape against the fire. "What's your name?" she asked. "Seth." "Well, Seth, you're a burden. And I don't like burdens." She grabbed a strip of cloth from a small pile. It looked like it had been torn from a dress. She dipped it in the now hot water and pressed it to his side. Seth arched off the floor, a soundless scream tearing his throat. It was a white-hot agony that eclipsed everything else. He fell back, his body trembling violently. "I told you to be quiet," she said, her voice strained. She pressed it again. He must have passed out. When he came to, the fire was lower, and she was sitting against the far wall, the rifle across her lap, watching him. His side was a universe of throbbing pain. but it was a clean pain. He was covered with a thin blanket. "Drink," she ordered. She nudged a tin cup toward him. He reached for it, his hands shaking so badly he couldn't close his fingers around it. She sighed, a sound of pure exasperation. She got up, knelt, and lifted his head with one hand, pressing the cup to his lips with the other. It was just warm water, but it felt like life. He drank greedily. When he finished, she let his head drop back to the hard-packed earth. He passed out again. The next few days were a fever dream. He was hot, then he was cold. He was burning with thirst. He heard the wind, a constant, screaming howl. He heard the pop and crackle of the fire, and he heard her, muttering. She was always moving, tending the fire, pacing the small, clear space. She talked to herself, or to him, or maybe to the ghosts in the ruined chapel. "Just another mouth to feed," she'd whisper, her voice bitter. "And for what? So you can get strong and try to put your hands on me? So you can go back down there and tell Creed where I am? Damned if you do." He'd see her shadow as she piled more of the broken pews onto the fire. She was keeping him alive, but she hated every minute of it. She would check his wound with rough, efficient hands, cleaning it with hot water and cloth, never saying a word to him. She'd feed him broth, thin and tasting of squirrel, lifting his head with that same impatient strength. On what he thought was the third day, the fever broke. He woke up, and the world was sharp again. The pain was still there, a deep, steady ache, but his mind was clear. She was sitting by the fire, sharpening her knife on a whetstone. The sound was a rhythmic, scraping shush against the wind. "You're awake," she said, not looking up. "Reckon so," he rasped. His throat felt like sandpaper. "Good. You can fetch your own water." She nodded toward the pot. He sat up slowly. The room spun, but he clenched his jaw and waited for it to settle. He was weak, weaker than a newborn colt. His side felt like it had been stitched with barbed wire. He looked down. His shirt was gone. His side was wrapped in clean, white strips of cloth. He looked at her. She was still sharpening the blade. "Shush, shush, shush. You saved my life," he said. She finally looked at him. Her eyes were the color of a winter sky, a pale, cold gray. "I kept you from dying," she corrected. "There's a difference. A dying man is trouble. A dead man is a problem. I'm just trying to avoid problems." "Where did you get this?" he asked, touching the clean bandage. "My petticoat," she said flatly, going back to her knife. "Now it's your bandage. Don't bleed through it. It's the last one." The silence stretched out, filled only by the wind and the knife. Seth looked around the chapel. It was a tiny, single-room building. Half the roof was open to the sky. Snow was piled high in the corners. In the back, by what was left of the altar, was her nest, a pile of furs, a saddlebag, and a small crate. His own saddlebags were near the door, his gun belt coiled on top. She had disarmed him. Smart. "Who are you?" he asked. "Lila." "Lila, I'm Seth." "I know. You told me." She tested the blade on her thumb, then stood. She slid the knife into its sheath. "You're on my blanket. I want it back." He was lying on the thin, worn blanket she had first dragged him onto. He shifted, wincing, and pushed it away. He was on the cold dirt. She picked up the blanket, shook it out, and took it back to her side of the fire. She sat down, wrapped it around her shoulders, and picked up the rifle. She started to clean it. They didn't speak for an hour. Seth watched the fire, feeling the cold of the floor seep into his bones. He was alive, but he was a guest. No, not a guest, a prisoner, or a stray dog she hadn't decided to shoot yet. "What are you doing here?" he finally asked. She worked the cleaning rod down the barrel. "Surviving." "Hiding," he said. He'd heard her muttering. He remembered the name. "From Creed." Her hand stopped. She looked at him, and the coldness in her eyes was sharp enough to cut. "You know him." "Never heard the name." "Then don't say it. Don't you ever say that name again." "What are you hiding from?" She slammed the rifle down and stood, stalking over to him. She stood over him, her shadow blocking the firelight. "You want to know?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a rage that was terrifying. "I'm hiding from down there. I'm hiding from men who think they can buy a girl for $2 and a shot of whiskey. I'm hiding from men who think a fist is a good way to say goodnight. I'm hiding from ranchers who think no is a word they can beat out of you." She was shaking. He could see it. Men always take what they want. Cowboy, always. They take your work, they take your body, they take your life and don't even say thank you. So you just lie there and heal. And then you get the hell out of my chapel. She turned and went back to the fire, her back to him. A rigid, trembling line. Seth lay back, his heart hammering. He knew that kind of anger. It was the kind that came from fear. The kind that came from being hurt so bad you turned yourself into a weapon just to get through the day. He said nothing. He just closed his eyes and listened to the wind. He started to mend, slowly. The first day he stood, he almost fainted. Lila watched him, her face a mask of contempt, but she didn't offer a hand. He was glad. He leaned against the cold stone wall, breathing hard, until the dizziness passed. He took over tending the fire, adding the pieces of wood she had stacked. He would fetch the snow to melt for water. They fell into a grim routine. She would hunt, disappearing for hours with the rifle, and come back with a squirrel or, on a good day, a rabbit. He would skin it with his own knife, which she had given back to him, handle first and with a warning look, and she would cook it. They ate in silence. The most curious thing was his new place in the chapel. She had her side, by the altar. He had his, by the door. His bed was his own bedroll, which he'd salvaged from his saddle, and he never crossed the invisible line between them. He never, ever touched her. He was a man, and he was healing. He hadn't been with a woman in months, and Lila, even wild and thin and dressed in rags, was beautiful. A hard, broken kind of beautiful, but it was there. He saw it in the curve of her neck when she tended the fire, in the fierce concentration in her eyes when she listened to the storm. He knew she was watching him. He could feel her gaze when he pulled his shirt on in the morning, when he washed his face with the icy water. She was waiting. She was waiting for the man she knew to show up, the one who would take. But Seth just kept his eyes down. He kept his hands busy. He chopped wood from the last of the broken pews, his stitches pulling with every swing of the hatchet. He kept his words polite. "Thank you for the meat. I'll fetch the water." He saw her curiosity grow. It was in the way she'd stop her work to watch him, her head tilted. He was a puzzle she couldn't solve. He was a man, but he wasn't acting like one. He wasn't gentle, he was just respectful. And that, more than anything, seemed to put her on edge. Then the blizzard hit. It had been snowing for days, but this was different. The wind returned, this time with a solid, deafening roar. The snow didn't fall. It moved sideways. It blasted through the cracks in the walls, covering everything in a fine, white powder. The hole in the roof was a vortex of swirling white. Within a day, the snow was piled to the windowsills. By the second day, it was covering the door. They were trapped, well and truly trapped. "We have to keep the fire high," Lila said, her voice tight. "If it goes out, the cold will kill us before the hunger does." The world shrank to the small circle of firelight. The cold was a physical thing, a beast pressing in on them from all sides. The chapel was an icebox. That night, the temperature dropped so low the stones of the fire ring cracked. Lila shivered in her pile of furs. Seth was shivering in his bedroll. The fire was roaring, but the cold was winning. "You're going to freeze over there," Lila said, her voice sharp. "I'm all right. Don't be an idiot. Your lips are blue. Get your bedroll. Bring it closer to the fire." He hesitated. Closer meant closer to her. "I'm not going to bite you, cowboy. But I won't watch you freeze to death either. It's stupid." He dragged his bedroll, wincing at the pull in his side, and laid it out on the other side of the fire ring. They were maybe 6 feet apart. The heat was better. He could feel it on his face, but the tension in the air was so thick he could taste it. It was electric and sharp. They lay there for hours, listening to the storm. Neither of them slept. He could hear the small sound of her breathing. He could see the outline of her body under the furs. He kept his hands clenched into fists inside his bedroll. "Why'd you get shot?" she asked, her voice soft, muffled by the furs. Seth stared at the smoke rising to the hole in the roof. "Job went bad." "What kind of job?" "Moving cattle." "Stealing cattle? You mean—" He didn't answer. "That's how men like you get shot," she said, her voice hardening. "Stealing things, taking things that ain't yours." The words hit him, harder than the bullet. He thought of the boy. His bullet. Wrong target. "Yeah," he whispered. "That's how." "Do you even care?" she asked, rising up on one elbow. He could see her eyes flashing in the firelight. "Do you feel one bit of remorse for it?" "More than you know," he said, his voice thick. "I doubt it. Remorse is for folks who have something left to lose." "And you don't?" She laughed, a short, bitter sound. "I've got a knife and a rifle, and I'll use them. That's all I've got. That's all there is." "There's forgiveness," he said, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. "Forgiveness?" She spat the word. "Who's giving it? You think God lives here in this wreck? I smashed his altar for firewood. He ain't here, and the people down there?" She shook her head. "They don't forgive women like me, and I don't forgive men like them. Forgiveness is a lie they tell you to make you lie down quiet." She was wrong. He knew she was wrong. But the truth of his own sin was too heavy. "I killed a boy," he said, the confession ripped out of him. He wasn't part of it. He was just there. "I shot him. I didn't even mean to." Lila went very still. She stared at him across the fire. The wind howled, filling the silence. "So you're one of them," she finally said, her voice flat. "A killer. I didn't mean to." "They never do. Creed didn't mean to break my ribs. He just did. Men just do things. And then they say they didn't mean to." "It's not the same," he said, sitting up. The pain in his side was sharp, but not as sharp as the pain in his chest. "I'd take it back. I'd take his place, if I could." "But you can't," she said. "So you're just another man with blood on his hands, hiding in my chapel. You don't deserve forgiveness. You just deserve to be cold." She lay back down, pulling the furs over her head. Seth sat there, the fire painting his face in light and shadow. She was right. He knew it. He didn't deserve to be warm. He didn't deserve to be alive. He fed another piece of wood to the fire, then lay back down, the cold of the dirt floor a welcome penance. He must have dozed, because he woke to the sound of her voice. It was hours later. The fire was lower. "Are you just going to sit there all night?" she said. Her voice was different. Not angry, just tired. She had turned to face him. He was still sitting up, staring into the embers. "Hurry up and lie down," she teased. The words were hard. A saloon girl's words. A dare. It was what she knew. It was her armor. She was testing him, trying to make him the man she understood. Seth turned his head. He looked at her. He didn't see the hard words. He didn't see the saloon girl. He saw the woman who had torn up her own petticoat to bandage him. He saw the fear in her eyes when she'd spoken of Creed. He saw someone just as broken and haunted as he was. He didn't move. He just watched her, his gaze steady. He watched her until the teasing, brittle look in her eyes wavered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. Then vulnerability. He wasn't playing the game. His look wasn't hunger. It was something else. It was something close to reverence. He finally broke the gaze and lay down on his bedroll. He turned his back to the fire, and to her, keeping the cold, empty space between them. He heard her let out a breath, a long, shaky sigh, before she too settled into the silence. The snow did not stop for 4 days. It piled in silent, heavy drifts against the chapel walls, sealing the broken door shut, pouring through the gaps in the boards like white sand. The world outside was gone, erased. The world inside shrank to the flickering circle of the fire, and the cold was a living thing that stalked the edges of the light, always pressing closer. Their supply of wood, the smashed remains of the pews and the altar, was dangerously low. The last of the jerky was gone. They were living on thin, bitter broth made from boiled pine needles and the bones of the last rabbit. Hunger made them weak, and the weakness made the cold more potent. The first night of the great blizzard, Seth had stayed awake, feeding the fire stick by stick, while Lila slept fitfully on her side. The second night, she took the watch, her rifle across her lap, her eyes burning in the dim light. They were two separate, stubborn points of survival. On the third night, the cold was so sharp it felt like breathing glass. Seth watched Lila, huddled in her furs. Her shivering was constant, a violent, rattling tremor that shook her whole frame. He was no better, his own blankets offering little protection. "This is foolish," he said, his voice a low rasp. Lila's eyes snapped open. "What?" "We're freezing, separately." He pushed his bedroll with his boot, sliding it across the dirt floor until it was parallel to her pile of furs, just on the other side of the fire. "The fire's not enough. We need to share warmth, or one of us won't see morning." She stared at him, her face tight with suspicion. This was it. This was the moment the man she expected would finally show himself. "I'm not," she began, her voice hard. "I'm not asking you to." He cut her off, his voice flat. "I'm telling you, I'm cold. You're cold. Put your furs here, between us and the wall. I'll put my bedroll on the outside. We lie back to back. We don't talk. We just sleep. It's practical." He was offering his back to her, a position of vulnerability. Lila watched him for a long, silent minute. The wind screamed through the broken bell tower, a high, thin sound of absolute desolation. She was so cold, her feet were numb. She made her decision. Without a word, she dragged her furs and the thin blanket, arranging them against the stone wall, as far from him as she could while still being near the fire. He laid his bedroll down, leaving a foot of bare earth between them. He lay down first, his back to her. He heard her slide into her furs. The silence was louder than the storm. He could feel the heat from her body, a faint warmth that just barely crossed the space between them. He could hear her breathe. It wasn't enough. "This is still foolish," he muttered. He rolled over, facing her. She was already watching him, her eyes wide in the dark. "We have to be closer, or it's pointless." He didn't move. He waited. She gave a small, jerky nod. He pushed his bedroll until it touched her furs. Then, slowly, he lay back down, this time on his side, facing her. She did the same. They were 2 feet apart, the dying fire between them. "My blanket," he said. He reached for his top blanket, the heavy wool one, and unfolded it. With a quick flick of his wrist, he cast it over the space between them, covering her and himself. Now they were in a small tent of shared warmth. The air under the blanket was instantly warmer. He could smell the smoke on her, and the faint, clean scent of pine. He heard her let out a shaky breath. "Go to sleep, Lila," he whispered. "You first." He closed his eyes. Sleep did not come. His heart was a drum against his ribs. Every nerve in his body was aware of her. He could feel the heat rolling off her. He stayed perfectly still, his hands fisted at his chest. Sometime in the deep of the night, in the grip of a cold-induced tremor, his boot brushed her leg. Lila gasped. A small, sharp sound. She went rigid. "Sorry," Seth breathed. "Just be still." They lay there, rigid, their hearts racing in unison, until the exhaustion finally pulled them under. When he woke, the light in the chapel was a dim, heavy gray. The fire was almost embers. He was still on his side. Lila was too, but in her sleep she had curled toward the warmth, her face now only inches from his. One of her hands rested on the dirt floor between them, her fingers almost touching his chest. He didn't move. He just watched her sleep. Her face, free of the waking hardness, was younger than he'd thought. There were faint freckles across her nose. Her lips were chapped, slightly parted. He felt a powerful, protective urge that had nothing to do with desire, and everything to do with it. He lay there until she stirred, her eyelashes flickering. Her eyes opened, and for a moment they were soft and lost. Then she saw him. She saw how close they were. She jerked back as if she'd been burned, scrambling out from under the shared blanket and putting the fire ring between them. "The fire's low," she snapped, her voice rough. She grabbed the hatchet and began to split the last piece of a broken pew. The storm broke 2 days later, the wind died, and the silence was as sudden and shocking as the blizzard had been. They dug their way out the door, emerging into a world that was blinding white. The snow drifted 10 feet high against the north side of the chapel. The air was clean and cold. Seth, his wound now a healing, puckered scar, took a deep breath. He felt stronger. "That roof," he said, squinting up at the gaping hole. "We can't go through another storm like that. We have to patch it, as much as we can." Lila looked at him like he was crazy. "Patch it with what?" "The other pews, the ones that are still whole. We can break them down. Use the planks. That's our firewood. It's no good as firewood if we freeze to death from the snow piling up on us. We need shelter, real shelter." He found the chapel's rusted old ladder in a corner, one of its rungs broken. He fixed it, lashing it with strips of leather cut from his saddle. He was methodical, his hands sure. He climbed up into the rafters, the cold air biting at his face. The view was staggering, a sea of white peaks, endless and beautiful and deadly. He spent the day clearing the snow from the sagging roof beams, his side pulling in protest. Lila stayed below, feeding the fire, watching him. He could feel her eyes on him, studying him. The next day, he started pulling up the remaining pews. He used the hatchet as a pry bar, the shriek of old nails pulling from dry wood echoing in the small space. "You'll bring the whole thing down," she said. "It's coming down anyway," he replied, not looking at her. "This way, at least we get a say in how—" He worked for hours, his hands bleeding. He was weaker than he thought, and he slipped, sliding down the angled roof, catching himself just before he went over the edge. He lay there, breathing hard, his heart slamming. "You're a damn fool!" Lila's voice came from just below him. He looked down. She was on the ladder, her hand outstretched. "Give me the hatchet," she said. "I can manage. You're bleeding on the snow. Give me the hatchet and tell me what to do. I'm not letting you kill yourself. I still need you to chop the wood." He stared at her, then handed the tool down. She was surprisingly strong and fearless. She climbed onto the roof with him, her movements quick and certain, for the rest of the day. They worked together. He'd pry the boards loose, and she'd guide them, tying them with rope so he could lower them into the chapel. They didn't talk much, just hold this, or watch your footing. But it was the first time they had worked as a team. It was a new, strange feeling. It felt good. That night, they sat by the fire, exhausted, their hands raw. The roof was not fixed, but it was better. The largest hole was now covered with a patchwork of warped planks. It was ugly, but it was solid. "Why do you know how to do that?" Lila asked, rubbing tallow into her cracked hands. "My father was a carpenter, for a while." "What happened?" "He found whiskey, liked it better." Seth shrugged, staring into the flames. "Taught me how to build a straight wall before he left. Though, guess I should be grateful for that." Lila was quiet for a long time. "My mother," she said, her voice so low he barely heard it. "She was Shoshone. My father was some white trapper. I never knew him. He passed through, left her with me, and kept going." Seth turned to look at her. She was not looking at him. She was looking at her hands. "She raised me in the white settlements, taught me to read, taught me to keep my head down. The women hated her. The men looked at her. She was beautiful. She died of a fever when I was 14. A day later, the preacher who buried her told me I couldn't stay alone, that it wasn't proper." She picked up a stick and jammed it into the fire, her movements sharp and angry. "He sold me," she whispered, "to a saloon owner in Wyoming. For $50. Said it was to pay for my mother's burial. He told me I'd be a dancer, a hostess." She laughed, that same bitter, broken sound he'd heard before. "I was a hostess for about an hour. Then the owner, a man named Creed, took me upstairs. He told me what I really was, and that's what I've been ever since." Seth's hands clenched. He said nothing. There was nothing to say. I was his property for 6 years, until he brought in a new girl, a blonde one from back east. He got drunk one night and he put his brand on me, the same one he puts on his cattle. Said I'd always be his. She was shaking, her voice thick with a rage that was old and deep. 2 months ago, he was gone, checking a line camp. I took his horse, his rifle, and all the money in his drawer, and I ran. I've been running ever since. I ended up here." She finally looked at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears and pure hatred. "So don't you talk to me about forgiveness. Seth, there's no forgiveness for men like him. And there's no forgetting." Seth's heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. He wanted to reach out, to touch her, but he knew if he did, she would shatter. Instead, he spoke. "The boy I killed," he said, his voice quiet. "His name was Thomas. He was 17. His father was the rancher who set us up. But the kid, he wasn't a fighter. He was just standing by the horses. I was firing at the smoke. I didn't see him." Seth held up his right hand. It was trembling. Not from cold, not from weakness. It was a fine, constant tremor. "It does this now," he said, staring at his own hand with a kind of detached horror. "Ever since I see his face, every time I close my eyes, he had freckles, like you." He looked at Lila. "You said I don't deserve forgiveness. You're right, I don't. You said I shouldn't be alive. You're right about that, too. When that bullet hit me, I was relieved. I thought, good, this is justice. But then I found this place, and I found you." He dropped his hand. "I'm just as haunted as you are, Lila, just by a different ghost." The air in the chapel changed. The confessions hung between them, raw and bleeding. This was a nakedness far deeper than skin. The tension that had been purely physical, a dangerous animal heat, was now something else. It was tangled up with their shame, their guilt, their desperate, buried loneliness. They still craved each other. But now, it wasn't just a simple bodily urge. It was a craving for the only other person in the world who understood the ruin. They began to watch each other with a new intensity, a silent, desperate hunger for connection. They went to their separate beds, but the space between them hummed. A few nights later, Seth woke to a sound that chilled him more than the cold. A scream. It was not a yell. It was a raw, choked, terrified sound. He was on his feet before he was even awake, his knife in his hand. Lila was thrashing in her furs, fighting something in her sleep. She was crying out, "No, get off me! No, please, Creed, no!" He crossed the space in 2 strides. He didn't think. He knelt beside her and grabbed her shoulders. "Lila, Lila, wake up! You're safe!" She came awake with a violent gasp, her eyes wide and blind with terror. She struck out, her fist catching him high on the cheekbone. He barely felt it. He just held her arms, gently but firmly. "It's me. It's Seth. You're in the chapel. You're safe. He's not here." Her breath was coming in ragged, painful sobs. She stared at him, her eyes slowly focusing. She saw who he was. She saw the concern on his face, and then she broke. The hardness that was her armor dissolved, and she collapsed, folding in on herself. A low, wounded sound came from her, the sound of an animal caught in a trap. He did the only thing he could. He sat on the furs, pulled her against his chest, and held her. He held her like he was holding splintered glass. He didn't stroke her hair. He didn't whisper comforts. He just held her, solid and warm, offering his own strength as a shield against the ghosts. He rested his chin on the top of her head and stared into the fire, his jaw tight. She cried, She wept into his shirt, her hands clutching his coat, a storm of grief and rage and fear she had held back for 6 years. He just held on, rocking her gently, until the sobs quieted into shudders, and the shudders into silence. She didn't pull away. She just lay against him, exhausted. He felt her fall back asleep, her breathing finally evening out. He held her for another hour, the fire burning low, until his own arms ached. Then, carefully, he laid her back down on her furs and covered her. In the morning, she was awake before him. She was sitting by the fire, sharpening her knife, her back to him. The wall was back up, higher and thicker than before. She didn't mention it, and neither did he, but the tension was now unbearable. He had held her. She had let him. They had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The air was so thick with unspoken things it was hard to breathe. That afternoon, she was cleaning the rifle, her movements jerky. He was bundling firewood. "You're just going to stand there?" she snapped. He stopped, turning to her. "Stand where?" "Just looking at me, like you're waiting, like you're owed something. Because you held me." "I'm not," he said quietly. "I don't think that's what men do. They do one small, decent thing, and they think it buys them the right to the rest of you. I'm not them. Lila." "Aren't you?" She stood, throwing the cleaning rag down. She walked right up to him, stopping so close he could see the angry flecks in her gray eyes. She was trembling. "You want me. Don't lie. I see you watching me. You're just like them. You just have more patience." "I want you," he admitted, his voice low. "But not like them." She laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "There is no not like them. There's only one way. Taking—" She poked him in the chest. "So go on. Take it. Prove me right." He didn't move. He just looked at her, his heart breaking. She saw his stillness, his refusal to be the man she needed him to be, and it made her angrier. She was desperate to break the tension, to get back to a world she understood. "Or are you a coward?" she taunted. "Are you afraid?" She leaned in, her lips inches from his. "Dare you to kiss me, cowboy, just once. That's all you get. One kiss. Prove you're a man." He looked at her mouth, then back to her eyes. He saw the dare, but beneath it, he saw the terror. She was testing him. She was begging him to be different, even as she dared him to be the same. Slowly, he lifted his hand, not to grab her, but to cup her cheek. His thumb was calloused, and it brushed gently against her skin. She flinched, but didn't pull away. "Just one," he whispered. He leaned in. He didn't crush his mouth to hers. He didn't take... He kissed her. It was slow. It was deep. It was so gentle it was almost painful. He kissed her like she was the first water he'd seen after a month in the desert. It was a kiss of reverence, of sorrow, of a deep, aching hunger that was more than just physical. He tasted the smoke on her, and the salt of her fear. Lila's hands, which had been fisted to push him away, slowly uncurled. A small, confused sound came from her throat. Her eyes fluttered closed. He kissed her for a long, slow count of 10. He felt the fight go out of her, replaced by a trembling, hesitant response. And then, just as she began to lean into him, he pulled away. He kept his hand on her cheek, his thumb brushing her skin. Lila's eyes opened. Her lips were trembling. She looked stunned, lost. The hardness was gone, washed away by a kiss that hadn't taken anything from her. You're not like them," she whispered, the words full of disbelief. Seth looked at her, his own heart aching. He wanted to kiss her again. He wanted to lay her down on the furs and never stop. "I want to be," he said, his voice raw with the truth. "But better." He let his hand fall. They stood there, inches apart, breathing the same air. The dare was over, the test was passed, and they were left with something new and terrifying. That night, they didn't speak of it, but when they lay down, there was no more talk of shared blankets. He put his bedroll next to her furs. They lay facing each other, the dying fire painting their faces. They were inches apart, close enough to feel the warmth of each other's breath, and for the first time in a long, long time, they both slept without dreaming. The thaw began not as an event, but as a sound. It was the sound of dripping. Water, released from its frozen prison, began to weep from the eaves. from the patched roof, from the high, snow-laden branches of the pines. The constant, screaming wind of the deep winter had been replaced by a quiet, insistent drip, drip, drip that sounded to Seth like a clock, ticking them forward into a new season. The snow, which had been a wall sealing them from the world, began to recede. It slumped away from the chapel walls, revealing the frozen mud beneath. The world, which had been pure, blinding white, was slowly regaining its color, its shape. The gray stone of the mountains emerged, and the dark, wet trunks of the trees. With the easing of the cold, their lives changed. It was no longer a desperate, minute-by-minute battle for warmth. The fire was still the center of their world, but it was no longer a hungry tyrant. They could leave it for an hour, 2 hours, and return to find hot embers waiting. Their lives shifted from pure survival to something that looked almost like living. They worked. It was a shared, unspoken rhythm. Seth's side was still tender, a puckered, angry scar that pulled if he moved too fast. But his strength had returned. He spent his days with a hatchet, felling smaller, dead trees for firewood, splitting the logs into quarters with a satisfying, clean thwack. He was methodical, building a high, neat stack of wood that would last them for weeks. Lila hunted. She had a poacher's patience. She would take the rifle and Seth's knife, disappearing for hours. She came back with squirrels, rabbits, and once, a small, tough grouse. She taught Seth how to set snares, her chapped hands moving with quick, deft precision, tying knots he couldn't master. They were a team. They worked like a couple, a man and a woman tending their small, broken homestead. They fell into a partnership so naturally that they never named it. He would bring in the wood, and she would have the fire built high, a pot of pine needle tea boiling on the stones. He would skin the game, and she would cook it, her silence one of new, comfortable habit rather than the old. Sharp-edged defense, the wall between them, the invisible line she had drawn down the center of the chapel, was gone. It had been erased, not by the kiss, but by the slow, steady rhythm of their shared days. His bedroll was now permanently beside her pile of furs. They no longer lay inches apart. They slept tangled together, sharing the blankets and the furs, his body a warm, solid presence against her back. And with this new domesticity, Lila changed. The hard, brittle woman was still there, but something else was emerging. A lightness, a playfulness. The teasing began in the mornings. It was her old armor, but the barbs were gone. Seth would wake first, his internal clock set by years of ranch work. He would slip from the blankets, moving quietly so as not to wake her, and stir the embers. One morning, as he knelt by the fire, her voice came from the pile of furs, low and sleepy. "You're stirring it too hard. Cowboy, you'll scare the heat away." He looked over his shoulder. She was watching him, her black hair a wild tangle on the furs, her gray eyes soft with sleep. He smiled, a slow, unused expression. "And good morning to you, too." "It's only a good morning if you have coffee," she muttered, sitting up, the fur pooling around her waist. "And we don't have coffee, so it's just a morning. We have pine tea." "Pine tea tastes like a tree. I want coffee. When we get down the mountain, I'll buy you a barrel of it." She watched him, her head tilted. "You'd do that?" "A man ought to keep his woman supplied with coffee," he said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Lila's breath hitched. His woman. The words hung in the air, potent and new. She didn't deny it. She just pulled the fur up to her chin, her eyes suddenly shy. "Well, hurry up with the tea, then." He was washing in the bucket of snowmelt, the icy water a shock to his skin. She came up behind him, her bare feet silent on the dirt floor. She ran one cold finger down his spine. Seth flinched, not from her touch, but from the sudden, electric jolt it sent through him. "You're jumpy," she teased, her voice a low purr. "I'm cold," he said, reaching for the scrap of cloth he used as a towel. "Are you?" She pressed her body against his back, her arms sliding around his waist. She was cold, but the places she touched him burned. "I could warm you up." This was the saloon girl, the woman who knew how to use her body as a weapon and a tool. But it was different now. There was no transaction in it. It was a question. Seth turned in her arms, his hands finding her waist. He looked down at her, his expression serious. "You're already warm," he said. He kissed her forehead. Just a simple, firm press of his lips. It was a dismissal of the game, and an acceptance of her. It flustered her more than if he had taken what she offered. She pulled back. Her cheeks flushed, and went to busy herself with the snares, muttering about his being a strange, cold-blooded man. He was not cold-blooded. He was simply careful. He was careful with her. The nights were different. The nights were for truth. The teasing of the day would fade with the light. They would lie in the darkness, the fire painting flickering shadows on the patched roof. They would whisper. They talked of small things, the first green shoots of wild onion he'd found, the way the snow looked blue in the moonlight, the sounds of the mountain waking up. And sometimes they talked of the things that still haunted them. "I still see his face," Seth whispered one night, his hand finding hers in the dark. "The boy, Thomas. Sometimes I wake up and I've been calling his name." Lila laced her fingers with his. His hand was rough, calloused, but his grip was gentle. "He's your ghost. Seth, everyone gets one. Some of us just get more." "You still dream of him?" He felt her nod in the dark. "Sometimes, but it's different now. When I wake up, you're here." The dream fades faster. Their fingers would brush, trace patterns on each other's palms. It was a slow, quiet claiming, a mapping of skin, a learning of scars. They had not taken the final step since that first kiss. The intimacy they were building was one of words, of shared warmth, of hands held in the dark. It was a foundation, solid and sure, before they built the house. The true test came on a bright, warm afternoon. The sun was streaming through the gaps in the roof, strong enough that they had let the fire burn down to almost nothing. The air in the chapel was damp and smelled of spring, of wet earth and pine. Seth had been outside, checking the perimeter, looking for tracks. He walked back into the chapel, his footsteps silent. Lila was by the fire, her back to him. She had stripped off her heavy wool dress to mend a tear in the seam. She was in her chemise, a thin, worn cotton shift that was scarred with old stains. And on her back, high on her left shoulder, was the brand. Seth stopped. He had known it was there. She had told him, but seeing it was a different thing. It was a knot of scarred, raised tissue, a crude, ugly symbol of ownership. It was a mutilation, a declaration that she was no more than cattle. It was the physical mark of her past, of every man who had ever hurt her. Lila went perfectly still. She didn't turn. She knew he was there. She knew what he was seeing. She was braced for the disgust, the pity, the turning away. This was the thing that made her ruined. This was the proof that she was spoiled, a thing to be used and marked. Seth stood there for a long time, his heart a heavy stone in his chest. He felt a white-hot, blinding rage at Creed, at a world that let such things happen. But the rage was secondary to the deep, aching sorrow he felt for her. He walked toward her. She didn't move. She was trembling, her shoulders rigid. He didn't stop until he was standing directly behind her. She was waiting for the verdict, slowly, as if approaching a skittish doe. He lifted his hand. He didn't touch her face or her hair. He laid his palm, calloused and warm, directly over the scar. Lila flinched, a violent shudder, but she did not pull away. She made a small sound, a choked-off sob. No one had ever touched it. It was a place of shame, a place to be hidden. Seth didn't stroke it. He didn't recoil. He just held his hand there, covering the mark, his warmth seeping into her skin. He was covering the brand with his own touch. "Now you've seen it," she whispered, her voice thick. She still had not turned. "Now you know what I am." She waited. "I know what you are," he said, his voice low and raw. She squeezed her eyes shut. ready for the final rejection. "You still want me?" She forced the words out. It was the question of her life. Seth moved his other hand to her shoulder, his thumb brushing her collarbone. He leaned his forehead against her hair, which smelled of wood smoke. "I never stopped," he replied. He felt the tension break in her. It left her in a single, ragged exhale. She turned in his arms, her face wet with tears. She hadn't known she was crying. She looked at him, her gray eyes stripped bare of all pretense, all armor. She was just Lila. He looked at her, and she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Not in spite of the scar, or the past, but because of it, because she had survived it. This time, when he kissed her, there was no hesitation. He lifted her into his arms, his bad side pulling, but he didn't care, and carried her the few feet to their bed of furs. Their first night together was not a storm. It was a settling. It was raw and quiet and sacred. He laid her down, and for a moment, he just looked at her. He saw the fear flicker in her eyes, the old habit of bracing for pain. "Lila," he said, his voice rough. He touched her cheek. "Look at me, just me. No one else is here." He undressed her slowly, with a reverence that was almost painful. He kissed the places that had known violence. He kissed her shoulder, her wrists, the hollow of her throat. He was unmaking her past, one touch at a time. She was trembling. "I don't know how," she whispered, her voice breaking. "How what?" "How to be like this. I only know how to be what they paid for." "There's nothing to know," he said, his own shirt hitting the floor. "Just be here, with me." He held her, for a long time, just held her. He let her feel his warmth, his stillness. He let her feel the steady beat of his heart against her. He was not taking. He was not in a hurry. He was holding her like a vow, not a possession. When they finally made love, it was slow. It was a discovery. For him, it was a release from the guilt, the ghost of the boy, the long, lonely years. For her, it was a reclamation. It was the first time her body had been a place of pleasure, not a place of service. She wept, silent, hot tears that tracked into her hair. The snowmelt was dripping from the rafters, a steady rhythm in the quiet chapel, and her tears mixed with it. He kissed her eyelids, salty and wet, like benedictions. He was blessing her. In this broken, ruined house of God, he was making her holy. Later, they lay tangled, her head on his chest, his hand stroking her hair. The silence was full and peaceful. "Seth?" she said into his skin. No one." She couldn't finish. "I know," he whispered. He held her tighter. "Sleep. I'm not going anywhere." The next day, everything was new. The light seemed brighter. The air felt cleaner. Lila was quiet, but it was a soft, wondering quiet. She moved around the chapel with a new grace, her body no longer a tense, coiled spring. She was gutting a rabbit he had snared, her hands moving with the practiced efficiency she always had. Seth was nearby, mending his boot. Suddenly, she stopped. Her hands, covered in blood, were still. She was staring at the rabbit, but she wasn't seeing it. A single tear fell onto the dark fur, then another. She began to weep. It was not the racking sobs of her nightmare. It was a deep, quiet, overwhelming grief. Seth was at her side in an instant. "Lila, what is it? Did you cut yourself?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. She looked at her bloody hands, then at him, her expression one of utter, heartbreaking revelation. "No man," she whispered, her voice choking. "No man ever treated me like I was worth soft hands. Not ever, until you." She wasn't just talking about the night before. She was talking about the morning tea, the shared blanket, the kiss on her forehead, the hand that covered her scar. She was crying for the 6 years of brutality, but also for the 1 month of tenderness that had undone it all. Seth's heart ached. He didn't have the words. So he acted. He took the knife from her hand. He gently took her wrists and led her to the bucket of water. He washed her hands, his own large, rough hands cleaning away the blood, his touch careful. Then he pulled her into his arms, her head resting on his shoulder, and just held her while she cried. He finished cleaning the rabbit himself. The spring came on in earnest. The pass was clearing. The air was warm. It was time to go. The chapel had been a sanctuary, but it was a ruin. They couldn't stay. "Where will we go?" Lila asked one night as they sat by the fire, eating the last of the roasted rabbit. "Down," Seth said. "Into the valley. We can follow the river south. Find a town where no one knows us. And then what? And then we start. I can find work, a ranch, a carpenter, anything. We save up. We get a small patch of land, something no one can take from us." Lila looked at him, her eyes wide with a hope she had never dared to feel. "A patch of land? For us?" "Just people, Lila," he said, repeating his own words, believing them now. "We can be whoever we say we are, Mr. and Mrs. Seth." "Whatever," she smiled, a real, genuine smile. It transformed her face. "Mrs. Seth." She tried the name. It sounded strange and wonderful. "I like that." They had a future. It was a small, fragile thing, but it was theirs. They would leave in 2 days, when the last of the snow on the pass had melted. The next day, Lila was on the ridge above the chapel, gathering the last of the wild onions. The air was clear, and she could see for miles. She looked down at the valley, the one they would soon be walking into, and she saw them. They were distant. 5 riders, moving slowly, picking their way up the trail from the valley floor. They were too far away to see faces. But one man, the one in the lead, had something tied to his saddle. It was a splash of color against the brown and gray of the landscape. A red scarf. Lila's blood went cold. It was Creed's ranch sign, the scarf he always wore, or the one he gave to his lead man. She didn't wait. She dropped the onions and ran, sliding down the muddy slope, stumbling, catching herself, her heart a cold stone in her chest. The terror was back, instant and complete, choking her. She burst into the chapel. Seth was packing his bedroll. He looked up, smiling. The smile died when he saw her face. She was white as snow, her eyes wide with a panic he hadn't seen since her nightmare. "He's here," she gasped, her hands clutching the doorframe. Seth was on his feet, his hand on his gun. "Who?" "Creed. His men. 5 of them. I saw them on the trail. They're coming up the mountain. They're looking for me. They saw the smoke." She was already moving, grabbing her furs, her rifle. She was the trapped animal again. "I have to go," she said, her voice fast and frantic. "I have to lead them away. You stay here. Hide. They aren't looking for you." "When they're gone, you go south. Go to Oregon. Get your land." She was pushing him toward the back wall, toward a loose board they had used to come and go. "Lila, stop! You don't understand. He'll kill you. He'll kill you just for being with me. Go!" She was going to run. She was going to sacrifice herself. She was going to run, just as she had for months. And she would run until he caught her. Seth grabbed her arms. He held her still. "No," he said, his voice a low, hard command. "Seth, please, you don't know him." "I know you," he said, his eyes locked on hers. He wasn't scared. He was angry. "I'm not letting you go." He released her and turned, not to the loose board, but to his own saddlebag. He began checking his pistol, his movements economical and deadly. "What are you doing?" she whispered, her panic turning to confusion. "Didn't you hear me? I'm leaving. You're safe." He looked up at her, his face grim. "I heard you, and I'm telling you, you're not going alone." He shoved his pistol back into its holster and grabbed his bedroll. "If you run, I run too. That's the end of it." Lila stared at him. No one had ever chosen her. No one had ever stood with her. They had only taken from her, or hidden from her. He was choosing her trouble. He was choosing her. "Seth," she breathed, her hand reaching for him. "Get your rifle," he said, his voice flat. "They want to fight. We'll give them one, but we're not doing it here. We run, together, now." They had maybe 10 minutes. "The rifle, the ammunition," Seth said, his voice a low, hard command. He was not the patient, healing man. He was the man from the gunfight, sharp and focused. All the jerky, the blanket, the pot. Go! Lila didn't question him. She flew. The terror had given her a frantic, desperate energy. She rolled the jerky into the wool blanket. She grabbed the pot, her hands shaking so badly she dropped it. The clatter on the stone floor loud as a gunshot. "Quiet!" Seth snapped. He was at the door, peering through a crack. "They're moving slow. The trail's still muddy. We have time, but not much." He had his bedroll slung, his six-shooter heavy on his hip. He took the rifle from her, checking the load. He shoved the spare box of cartridges into his coat pocket. "All right," he said. "Saddlebags. We travel light." They had their meager possessions strapped to their backs in under 5 minutes. Their home was bare. The furs, the blankets, the pot, the food. It was all on their shoulders. The chapel was just a cold, empty shell again. "The back way," Seth said, moving toward the loose board. "We go into the trees. Keep the ridge between us and them. We don't stop until dark." He pulled the board back. A blast of wind hit him in the face, stinging his eyes. It was not a spring breeze. It was a howl. Lila, right behind him, made a small, choked sound. It was snowing, not a gentle spring flurry. It was a thick, wet, driving snow, coming in sideways on a wind that shrieked like a banshee. The thaw was over. Winter had returned. A brutal, final fist. "No," Lila whispered. She stared at the blinding wall of white. "No, it can't be." Seth stepped out, the wind tearing at his coat. He looked up the trail. He could no longer see the valley. He could barely see 20 feet. "Damn it," he breathed, the word torn from his lips by the wind. He looked back at Lila. Her face was a mask of pure, absolute despair. This was not shelter. This was a trap. "We can't run in this," he said, raising his voice over the storm. "We'll be blind in 5 minutes. We'll walk right into them, or off a cliff. They're still coming. Seth, they won't stop for snow." "They will," he said, pulling her back inside, forcing the board back into place. The sound of the wind was muffled, but its power was terrifying. "They'll hunker down, wait it out, but they know we're up here." "The snow just trapped us with them?" Lila slid down the wall, her pack still on her back, and buried her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook. She was a rat in a barrel, and the water was rising. Seth stood in the center of the room, the tension coiling in his gut. The chapel was no longer a sanctuary. It was a tomb, and the men outside were waiting to bury them. "Unpack," he said, his voice grim. "What?" "Unpack. We're staying. We'll be here for a day, maybe 2. We need the food, we need the fire, and we need to be ready." He dropped his own pack and began to rebuild the fire. His movements quick and angry, the hope of the morning, the plan for their future. It was all gone, erased by the white. The next 2 days were a kind of slow, waking nightmare. The blizzard raged. The world was reduced to the gray, smoky interior of the chapel, the constant, maddening scream of the wind, and the sound of their own breathing. The fear was a third person in the room with them. It sat at the fire. It lay with them in the furs. Every crack of a freezing branch, every scrape of ice falling from the roof, was the sound of Creed's men. Lila was wound tight, her body a coiled spring. She sat with her knife in her hand, staring at the door. She barely spoke. Seth was the opposite. He was a creature of grim motion. He could not be still. He knew they were exposed. The men were out there, camped in the pines, waiting. On the first morning of the storm, he pulled his coat on tight. "Where are you going?" Lila asked, her voice sharp with panic. "To set a welcome," he said. He grabbed his hatchet and the coil of leather rope. "Seth, no, they'll see you." "They can't see their own hands. I won't be long." He slipped out the back. He was swallowed by the white. Lila paced the chapel, her heart hammering, convinced he was gone, that he had left her. He came back an hour later, covered in ice, his face raw from the wind. He was carrying a tangle of rusted cans he'd salvaged from the dump heap they'd made, and the old, cracked iron bell from the ruined tower. the one that had fallen near the door. He didn't explain. He sat by the fire, his hands shaking from the cold, and began to work. He cut the leather into thin, strong strips. He tied them to the cans, to the bell clapper. "What is that?" Lila whispered. "A warning." He went out again, this time on the north side. He was gone for 2 hours. Lila thought she would go mad from the waiting. When he returned, he was exhausted, but his eyes were hard. "What did you do?" "I strung them up," he said, chafing his frozen hands by the fire. "On the path, both paths, 50 yards out. Anyone comes near, we'll hear them." He had built them a perimeter. He had not run, he had dug in. He was preparing to fight. The tension in the chapel changed. The raw panic was still there, but beneath it, something else was growing. The intimacy they had found, the night they had shared, it was still there, amplified by the fear. They were pressed together, 2 bodies against the cold, 2 souls against the darkness. At night, they lay in the furs, not for love, but for survival. But their bodies remembered. His arm would be around her, her back pressed to his chest, and his heart would hammer. He would feel her tremble, and he wouldn't know if it was from fear or from his touch. They were trapped between fear and longing. The desire for life and the desire for each other became one and the same. To be alive was to feel his hand. To be safe was to be in his arms. On the second night, the storm had not eased. The woodpile was low again. The silence in the chapel was heavy, strained. They both knew that when the storm broke, the men would come. This could be their last night. Seth was cleaning the rifle, his face grim in the firelight. Lila was watching him. She was watching his hands, strong and calloused. She was watching the set of his jaw. He was going to die for her. Her mind, steeped in 6 years of trauma, could find only one solution. Her body was the only currency she had ever known. It was the only thing of value she had to offer. If this was his last night, she would give him a reason to die. Or a darker, more desperate thought. If she gave him what he wanted, all of it, maybe he would be satisfied. Maybe he would let her go. Let her run out into the storm alone, to draw them off. She could pay him for his kindness. And in paying him, she would set him free. She would earn his safety. She rose from the furs, her movements fluid and silent. She crossed the small space and knelt behind him. He tensed, feeling her presence. "Lila?" She didn't answer. She put her hands on his shoulders, her fingers digging into his muscles. He stopped cleaning the rifle. "You're so tight," she whispered, her voice a low, rough purr. It was the saloon girl's voice. She began to rub his shoulders, her touch practiced. Seth's eyes closed for a moment. It felt good, but it felt wrong. There was a desperation in her touch, a frantic energy that had not been there the night they made love. "Lila, don't," he said quietly. "Don't what?" she breathed, her lips brushing his ear. She moved around him, settling onto his lap, facing him. She was all business, all seduction. "It's cold. We're scared. This is what people do. It's all right. I want to—" She kissed him. It was not the slow, tender kiss of their first time. It was a hard, hungry, taking kiss. She tasted of fear and pine tea. She pushed him back, her hands tearing at the buttons of his shirt, her mouth frantic. Seth's body responded before his mind could. He was a man, and he had been living on a knife's edge for 2 days. He kissed her back, his arms encircling her, pulling her tight. The firelight flickered. The wind screamed. It was a kiss of desperation, of last chances. She pushed him down onto the furs. This was what she knew. This was her power. She was in control. She would give him this, and it would settle the debt. But as her hand went to the buckle of his belt, he felt it. He felt the tremor in her fingers, a vibration that was not desire, but pure, animal terror. He felt the coldness of her skin. He opened his eyes. She was looking at him, but she wasn't seeing him. Her eyes were bright, unfocused, her lips pulled back in a grimace that was meant to be a smile. She was performing. She was the woman from the nightmare, bracing herself, doing the job. It was like a bucket of ice water. He grabbed her wrists. He was gentle, but his grip was iron. He stopped her. His hands clamped around her small, cold ones. "No," he said. Lila froze. Her performance shattered. Confusion, then anger, flashed across her face. What's wrong?" She tried to pull her hands free. "This is what you want. I know it is." "Stop, Lila." "Why? I'm not doing it right?" She was frantic. "I can be better. I can do whatever you want. Just tell me, please." She was begging. She was trying to earn him. He stared at her, and his heart broke. He saw it all. He saw the 6 years of Creed, the $50 sale, the brand. He saw her trying to pay him for his protection. He sat up, pulling her with him. He held her hands tightly, forcing her to be still, forcing her to see him. "Lila, look at me." Her eyes were wild, full of tears. "Let me go, Seth. Let me do this. I have to." "Why?" he asked, his voice raw. "Why do you have to?" "Because you're going to die," she sobbed, the truth ripping out of her. "He's going to kill you, and it's my fault. I have to pay you. I have to make it right." The words hung in the smoky air. He let go of her wrists and cupped her face, his rough hands a cage of tenderness. He made her look at him. "You don't have to earn me," he whispered. The words hit her, a physical blow. She stared at him, her lips trembling, her mind unable to comprehend. "I'm not Creed," he said, his voice thick. "I'm not one of them. I'm not a customer. You don't pay me. What we have, it isn't a transaction. I am here because I choose to be. I'm with you because I want you. Not this. Not the woman they made you be." She shattered. It was not a cry of grief. It was a cry of release. A lifetime of shame, of being a commodity, of being a thing to be bought and sold and earned. It all broke apart at his words. She collapsed against him, her body limp, her sobs deep and racking. She buried her face in his chest, her hands clutching his shirt. "I don't know how." She wept into his skin. "I don't know how to be, just to be." "It's all right," he whispered, his arms enclosing her, holding her tightly. He stroked her hair, his own eyes burning. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. You don't have to be anything but what you are." She cried for a long time. He just held her, rocking her gently, the wind howling its mournful song around them. Finally, her sobs quieted. She was still, her breath shuddering. She was pressed against his bare chest, her cheek against his skin. She lifted her head, her face stained with tears, her eyes red, but they were clear. They were seeing him. Slowly, she leaned forward. She kissed his chest, right over his heart. It was not a kiss of seduction. It was not a payment. It was a kiss of such profound, trembling gratitude. It felt like a prayer. It was the first, truest gift she had ever given. He held her head, his fingers tangled in her hair, and closed his eyes, a single tear escaping to trace a line through the grime on his cheek. The storm broke in the pre-dawn dark. It did not fade. It stopped. The wind died, and the sudden, total silence was deafening. It woke them both from a fitful sleep in the firs. They lay still, listening, and then they heard it, a faint, metallic clink from the north. Seth was on his feet before the sound faded, the rifle in his hand. He pulled Lila up, his other hand over her mouth. Another sound, clang jangle, the traps. "They're here," he breathed. He pushed her into the darkest corner, behind the small, crumbling wall of the altar. "Stay down. Don't make a sound. Not one." He knelt by the main wall, peering through a crack. The world was a pale, pre-dawn gray, and they were there, 5 men, dark shapes against the snow, moving slowly, rifles ready. One of them, a big man with a red scarf, pointed at the chimney hole. "Smoke!" the man's voice carried, rough and clear in the still air. "They're in there! The whore's in there!" Lila stifled a sob, pressing her face into her knees. "Flush 'em out," the man said. "Bar the front door. We'll burn 'em out. I want her alive. If we can, kill the man." They heard the heavy thud of a log being jammed against the main door. They were barricaded. Then, the smell. It was not the clean, resinous scent of their own fire. It was acrid, oily, kerosene. "They're setting a fire," Seth whispered, his face grim. He moved to the back wall, to the loose board. "Lila, we're leaving, now!" He kicked the board out. A cloud of black smoke immediately billowed in. They had set the fire on all sides. The heat was instant. The chapel was a tinderbox of old, dry wood. Lila scrambled to the opening, but the smoke was too thick. She choked, a harsh, racking cough. "I can't," she gasped, her eyes streaming. "I can't see." The roar was starting, the sound of a hungry beast. Flames began to lick up the wall. The smoke was a solid, stinging thing, filling the small space, stealing the air. Seth grabbed the wool blanket, the one they had shared. He shoved it at her. "Wrap it round your head. Stay low." He pushed her toward the hole. She stumbled, falling to her knees, overcome by the smoke. He heard the whoosh as the roof timbers, the ones they had patched, caught fire. Cinders rained down. The chapel was an inferno. Lila was on the ground, coughing, disoriented. Seth made his choice. He slung the rifle over his back. He grabbed Lila, hooking one arm under her knees, the other around her back, and lifted her. "Hold on," he yelled over the roar. He carried her, his lungs burning, his eyes blind. He plunged through the hole in the back wall, into the searing heat and smoke, and tumbled out onto the snow. They fell in a heap, gasping, gulping the clean, cold morning air. Seth's hair was singed. Lila's face was black with soot. "Seth!" a man yelled. They had been seen. Seth scrambled to his feet, pulling Lila with him. He saw two of the men rounding the corner of the burning building, raising their rifles. He didn't think. He fired. He shot from the hip, the sound of his pistol deafening. He didn't aim to kill. He aimed at the snow at their feet. The men dove for cover. "Run!" Seth yelled. He grabbed Lila's hand. They plunged off the path, into the deep, unbroken snow of the forest. They scrambled, fell, and got up again. Trees their only cover. Behind them, they heard the shouts. They heard the full, terrible roar as the roof of the chapel caved in, sending a fountain of sparks and flame into the gray sky. They fled into the forest, with nothing but the rifle on his back, the blanket clutched in her hand, and each other. The only home they had ever known was a pillar of smoke behind them. The forest was not a sanctuary. It was a crucible. The fire behind them, the pillar of smoke from their burning home, was a beacon for the men who hunted them. They ran, fueled by a terror that was colder than the snow. They plunged into the trees, Seth in the lead, pulling Lila by the hand. The snow was deep, unbroken, a heavy, wet blanket that stole their strength. It clogged their boots and clung to the single blanket Lila had saved. They were running uphill, scrambling over fallen logs, their lungs burning in the thin, cold air. "Don't stop," Seth gasped, pulling her up after she fell. "Don't look back." But she did. She looked back once. The sky above the ridge was black with smoke. The chapel was gone, the only home she had ever known. The only place she had ever been safe was a memory. A sob tore from her, but she choked it down. They ran until their legs gave out. They ran until the shouts behind them faded, swallowed by the forest and the heavy snow. Seth finally found a cleft in a rock face, a shallow overhang barely big enough for two people, and shoved her into it. He stood guard, his pistol in his hand, his breath coming in white. Ragged clouds. They were soaked. The snow, melting from their panicked run, had seeped through their clothes. The wind was a razor. As the adrenaline faded, the cold set in, a deep, merciless chill that found their bones. "We have to keep moving," Seth said, his voice a rasp. "But slower. They'll be tracking us." "The snow," Lila whispered, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely speak. "They'll see our tracks." "It's still snowing. It'll cover them, if we're lucky." He looked at her, his face grim. Her hair was matted with soot and melting ice. "We have to go where they won't look. Up!" For 3 days, they moved. They were no longer a man and a woman. They were animals, ragged and hunted. They moved through the thickest pines, across wind-blasted ridges where the snow was thin, and through creek beds where the icy water numbed their feet, all to hide their trail. They ate nothing. They drank melting snow. At night, they did not sleep. They huddled together under the one remaining blanket, which was stiff with ice. They sought shelter in hollow logs or under the dense boughs of spruce trees. They would press their bodies together, sharing a desperate, flickering warmth, and listen. Every snap of a twig, every call of a night bird, was Creed's men. On the 4th day, Seth's strength, already taxed by his healing wound, began to fail. But he saw the tremor in Lila's hands, the blue tint of her lips. He took the rifle, which he had carried, and pushed it into her hands. "You have to," he said. He sat on a log, his head in his hands, while she hunted. She was gone for an hour, and it was the longest hour of his life. He heard the single, sharp crack of the rifle. She came back with a squirrel. It was small, but it was life. They had no way to make a fire. The men were too close. Seth skinned it with his knife, his hands clumsy and numb. They ate the meat raw. The blood was hot in their mouths. They tore at it like wolves. Their civilized selves burned away with the chapel. They found a shallow cave that night, a dark crack in a granite cliff. It was no more than a hole, but it was out of the wind. They crawled in, pulling the blanket over the entrance. It was the first time they had been in true darkness, away from the endless, reflecting white. They were ragged. Seth's beard was matted with ice. Lila's dress was in tatters, her hands bleeding from cuts she didn't remember getting. They were thin, and they were hollowed out by fear and hunger. Lila began to shiver. It was not from the cold. It was a deep, internal tremor, a collapse. "It's me," she whispered into the darkness. Seth, lying beside her, his body aching with cold, turned his head. "What?" "It's me. I'm the poison." Her voice was dead, flat. "The chapel was fine. You were fine. Then I came. And now, I brought this." "Lila, that's not true. Creed's men—" "It is true." She began to weep, but they were not the hot, freeing tears she had shed in his arms. They were cold, quiet tears of despair. "He'll never stop, and anyone I touch—" "Anyone who's kind to me, they get burned." She was staring at the dark rock above them. "Maybe the world is right. Maybe women like me. Maybe I'm just cursed. I'm not meant to be warm. I'm not meant to be safe. I'm just a thing to be used up and thrown in the fire." She was reciting the sermon that had been beaten into her for 6 years. The brand on her back was burning, a mark not of ownership, but of damnation. Seth listened. He had heard this despair in her voice before, but then it had been a cry for help. This was a statement of fact. She was giving up. She was letting the cold, dark world win. He was suddenly, violently angry. He was not angry at her. He was angry at Creed, at the world, at the fate that had ground this strong, beautiful woman into believing she was worthless. He grabbed her, his fingers biting into her shoulders. He pulled her around, forcing her to face him in the dark. "Don't you say that," he growled, his voice a fierce, low rasp. "Don't you ever say that." She was startled by his anger. "Seth, it's the truth." "No." He shook her, gently but firmly. "The truth is, you survived. The truth is, you're stronger than any man I've ever known. The truth is, I am here. You're here because I trapped you. You're going to die because of me." "I'm here because I chose to be," he said, his voice rising, echoing in the tiny cave. "I chose you. In the chapel. I chose you. In the fire. I chose you. And I'm choosing you now." He put his face close to hers, his breath warm against her cold skin. He could feel her trembling. "You are not cursed," he whispered fiercely. "You are wanted. Do you hear me? You're wanted." He paused, and the next word was a vow, a brand of his own, laid over the one Creed had left. "You're mine." Lila stared at him in the darkness. Her breath caught in her throat. Mine. It was the same word Creed had used. But from Creed, it meant possession. It meant he owned her, like cattle. From Seth, it meant belonging. It meant she was his, to protect, to fight for. It meant she was not alone. A sound tore out of her, a sound of such profound, starving need that it was more than a kiss. She lunged at him, her cold lips finding his. She kissed him like it was the last thing she would ever feel. It was not tender. It was not gentle. It was a fierce, desperate, starving kiss. It was the kiss of a drowned woman dragging her rescuer to the surface. She was kissing him with all the fight she had left, with all the rage and all the love that had been beaten down inside her. He kissed her back with the same wild, raw energy. He held her, his arms like steel bands, their bodies pressed together in the cold, wet darkness. This was not about sex. It was about life. It was a promise, sealed in the dark, that they would not be broken. They stayed that way for a long time, their breathing slowly calming, their hearts beating in time. They didn't make love. They just held on, and for the first time in days, the cold receded. They made their way down the mountain. The bounty hunter found them 5 days later. They had left the snow line, following a game trail down into a valley thick with pine and aspen. They were weak, but they were alive. The kiss in the cave had forged something new between them, a grim, unbreakable bond. They were kneeling by a stream, drinking deeply, when a voice spoke from the trees. "That's far enough." Seth was on his feet, his pistol out, but he was too slow. The man was already there, 10 yards away, a heavy repeating rifle held casually at his hip. He was not one of the men from the fire. This was someone new. He was lanky, dressed in expensive furs, and his face was clean-shaven. He looked like a banker, not a tracker, but his eyes were cold and professional. "The girl is property of Mr. Creed," the man said, his voice polite. "He wants her back. He's willing to pay $500 for her return." Lila was frozen, her hand in the stream, her face a mask of terror. "She's not for sale," Seth said, his pistol still in his hand, but he knew he was outmatched. The man smiled, a thin, unpleasant expression. "Of course not. But you, sir, you look like a practical man. You're also a wanted man. The boy you killed back in Wyoming, Thomas Riley. His father has a $1,000 price on your head. You're worth more than she is." Seth's blood ran cold. "Now," the bounty man continued, "I'm a businessman. I don't care about the boy. I was hired by Creed. I'm here for the girl, but I see a complication." He nodded at Seth. "So I'll make you an offer. You walk away, just turn around and disappear. I'll give you $100, right now, out of my own pocket, for your trouble. I get the girl, I get my $500, and I forget I ever saw your face. Everyone wins." He was offering to buy her. He was offering Seth a bribe. Lila looked at Seth. Her face was hollow. This was it. This was the moment. She had seen men sell other men for a bottle of whiskey. $100 was a fortune. It was his life. He could walk away, and he would be free. She braced herself. She knew, with a terrible, sinking certainty, what he would do. Every man had a price. Seth looked at the man. He looked at the rifle. He looked at Lila. He saw the despair on her face, the dead certainty that he would betray her. He holstered his pistol. The bounty man smiled. "A wise choice, Mr. Seth." "You're right," Seth said. "I'm a practical man." He took one step toward the man. Then he drew. It was not the slow, uncertain draw of a carpenter. It was the blurring, violent speed of the gunfight. He had not holstered his gun. He had primed it. The bounty man's smile vanished. His rifle, held casually, was too slow. Seth's pistol fired. The shot was deafening, echoing flatly through the trees. The bounty man screamed, a high, thin sound, and dropped his rifle. Clutching his leg, he fell to the ground, writhing. Seth had not aimed for the heart. He had aimed for the knee. He walked over to the man, his pistol smoking, his face a mask of cold fury. Lila was still kneeling by the stream, her hands over her mouth, her eyes wide with a shocked, disbelieving hope. "She's not yours," Seth said to the groaning man. "She's not Creed's, and she's not for sale." He picked up the man's rifle. He grabbed the man's hands and, using the man's own belt, tied him tightly to the base of an aspen tree. "What? What are you doing?" the man gasped, his face white with pain. "You're leaving me here? The wolves." "You're a businessman," Seth said, his voice flat. "This is the cost of doing business. Someone will find you. Or they won't." He went back to Lila. She was standing now, trembling. He grabbed her hand. "Let's go," he said. They left the man tied to the tree, his curses and pleas following them until they were swallowed by the forest. Seth did not look back. He had made his choice. He had shot a man, not in a chaotic, smoky gunfight, but in the cold light of day. He had chosen Lila over his own life, over money, over safety. They reached a town 2 weeks later. It was not a town, really, just a collection of sod houses and false-fronted buildings huddled in a deep valley. A place called Willow Creek. It was a place the world had forgotten. They walked out of the trees like ghosts. They were ragged, skeletal, their clothes in tatters. The blanket was gone. All they had was the bounty man's rifle, Seth's pistol, and each other. They walked into the general store. The proprietor, a small man with wire-rimmed glasses, stared at them as if they were apparitions. "Mister," Seth said, his voice a dry croak. He put the rifle on the counter. "I'll trade you this. For a room, 2 baths, and whatever food you can spare." The man looked at the rifle. It was a new model, worth a great deal. He looked at the hard, haunted man in front of him, and the woman hiding behind him. He nodded. "Boarding house is next door," he said. "Tell Mrs. Gable I said to put you up, and to send for the doc." They got a room. It was small, under the eaves, with a lumpy mattress and a single window. It was paradise. They bathed. They scrubbed away weeks of soot and blood and grime and fear. They washed away the mountain. That night, they lay in the bed. The sheets were clean and smelled of lye soap. It was the softest thing either of them had ever felt. Lila was sitting up, her damp hair hanging in her face. She was clean, but she still saw the woman from the saloon. "He's still looking," she whispered. "That man, he was one. There will be more." Seth was lying on his back, his arm over his eyes, exhausted. "We'll be new people." Lila looked at him. Then she looked at the small, cracked mirror on the wall. She saw her reflection. She saw the long, dark hair of the woman Creed had owned. She got out of bed, went to Seth's saddlebag, and took his knife. "What are you doing?" he asked. She went to the mirror. She took a handful of her long, black hair, and she cut it. She hacked at it, the blade sawing through the thick locks. It fell to the floor in dark, wet clumps. She cut it short, ragged and uneven, until it was no longer than a boy's. She stared at her reflection. The woman in the mirror was a stranger. She was not beautiful. She was not a saloon dancer. She was just a woman. She was free. She got back in bed. Seth said nothing. He just opened his arm, and she lay down, her head on his chest. They claimed to be married, Mr. and Mrs. Seth Parker. A new name, a new life. Lila, with her short hair and plain, second-hand dress, found work at the laundry. It was hot, grueling, faceless work. Her hands plunged in scalding water and lye 12 hours a day. She came home each night smelling of steam and soap, her hands raw. Seth, too weak for ranch work, used his father's trade. He was a carpenter. He was a leather worker. He mended harnesses. He resoled boots. He fixed a broken wagon wheel. He traded his work for food, for rent, for a new pair of boots for Lila. Their life became quiet. It became worn in. The terror of the mountain faded, replaced by the dull ache of hard labor. The passion of their first night, the desperate, starving kiss in the cave, that faded too. Their love was no longer a fire. It was a small, steady ember. It was the way he would be waiting for her when she came home from the laundry. A tin cup of hot, thin coffee ready. It was the way she would wordlessly take his coat and mend a torn seam. It was in the ritual he began every night. She would be sitting on the edge of the bed, rubbing her raw hands. He would come and stand behind her. He would place his hands on her shoulders, his thumbs digging into the knots of her muscles, working away the ache of the long day. Then he would bend, and he would kiss her. Not her lips, not her neck. He would kiss her shoulders. One, then the other. A soft, firm press of his lips on the place where she carried her burdens. He never touched the brand. He never had to. He was honoring her strength, not her scar. They were safe. They were, for a short, quiet month, at peace. Then the telegram arrived. Seth was in the general store, trading a finely tooled belt for a sack of flour. The telegraph key in the corner was clacking. The operator, a young man named Pike, tore the strip of paper. He read it, and his eyes went wide. "Sheriff," he called out. The sheriff, a portly, lazy man, was at the stove, drinking coffee. "What is it?" "Pike. Got a wire, from Wyoming, a rancher named Creed." Seth went perfectly still. His hand was on the sack of flour. "He's looking for a woman," Pike said, his voice loud in the quiet store. "Answers to Lila. Says she's a runaway. Dark hair, gray eyes. Got a brand on her left shoulder." The sheriff grunted. "Sounds like one of his high-priced whores. What's it to us?" "He's offering a reward, $700, and he thinks she came this way." Seth's blood turned to ice. He finished his transaction, his voice even, his hands steady. He thanked the proprietor. He picked up the sack of flour. He walked out of the store, into the muddy street. The peace was over. The world had found them. He was standing in the doorway, the 50-pound sack of flour slung over one shoulder. He said nothing. He just looked at her, his face a gray, grim mask. Lila, who had been mending his shirt, let her hands fall still. She knew. The peace was gone. He walked past her and set the sack down by the small, cold stove. He did not look at her. He looked at their meager possessions, the one spare blanket, the small crate of food, his leather-working tools. "We can be gone by dark," he said, his voice flat. "We can sell the tools for a mule, head north, up into the Idaho territory. They'll never find us there." He was already packing. He was the man from the mountain again, practical, focused on survival. He was ready to run. Lila watched him. She watched his hands, the hands that had held her, that had been so gentle, as they efficiently bundled his belongings. He was going to run, and he would take her with him. And they would run, and run, and run. "No." The word was quiet, but it stopped him cold. He turned, his coat half folded in his hands. "What did you say?" "No," she said again, louder this time. She stood up. Her hands were raw and red from the lye soap, but they were not shaking. "I'm not running. Seth." "Lila, you heard the man. $700. Creed won't stop. He'll send more. This town is not safe." "And the next town?" she said, her voice raw. "Will that one be safe? Or the one after that? We keep running. We never stop. We'll spend our whole lives looking over our shoulders. We'll starve in another forest. We'll freeze on another mountain. That's not a life. It's just waiting. It's better than being dead. Or being his," Seth countered, his voice harsh with fear. "Is it?" She walked toward him. "I spent 6 years as his. I spent a month as yours. I won't go back. And I won't spend the rest of my life running from a ghost. I'm tired. I'm so tired of being scared. So what's the plan then? We stay? We wait for them to come?" I don't know." She looked down at her hands. "I'm going to do the one thing I never did. I'm going to tell the truth. To someone who can stop him." "The sheriff?" "Lila, that man is lazy and he's a fool. He won't help you." "He might," she said, her voice thin with a hope she didn't feel. "He has to. It's the law." "Oh, the law?" Seth laughed, a bitter, harsh sound. "There is no law for men like Creed, or for women like you. You heard Pike. You're a runaway, Property. The word hit her, but she didn't flinch. I'm a woman, and I'm a citizen. He has to listen. She walked to the small, cracked mirror. She looked at her short, ragged hair. She looked at the plain, gray dress. She was not the saloon girl. She was Mrs. Parker, the laundress. She grabbed her thin shawl and walked to the door. Don't do this, Seth pleaded. Lila, please, let's just go. You can go, Seth, she said, her hand on the doorknob. She didn't look back at him. You should. You're a wanted man. You don't have to be part of this. You can be free. That's not what I meant, he said, his voice low. I know, but I have to do this. She left. She walked down the stairs and into the muddy street, leaving him alone in the room with the half-packed bags and the sack of flour. The sheriff's office smelled of stale coffee, tobacco, and wet dogs. Sheriff Barrows, a portly man with a stained vest, had his feet propped up on his desk. He did not lower them when she entered. Ma'am, he grunted, not looking up from the paper he was reading. Sheriff Barrows? Lila's voice was a small, thin sound. Her hands were clenched so tightly, her fingernails dug into her palms. That's me. What do you want? Mrs. Gable's laundry isn't missing sheets again, is it? No, sir, I'm here to report a crime. He sighed, a long, put-upon sound, and finally lowered his feet. He looked at her. His eyes raked her, from her boy-short hair down to her worn, damp boots. What kind of crime? A man, back in Wyoming, a rancher named Creed. He held me against my will. For 6 years. He hurt me. Barrows leaned back in his chair, his thumbs hooking in his vest. He looked amused. Hurt you, or just didn't pay you what you thought you were worth? Lila's face flushed. No, he branded me like I was cattle. Barrows stopped smiling. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Did he now? That's a serious accusation. A small, wild hope flickered in Lila's chest. He was listening. Yes, sir. And he sent that telegram. He's hunting me. I'm not his property. I'm asking for your protection. Sheriff Barrows was silent for a long, heavy moment. He tapped his fingers on the desk. Let me see it, he said. Sir, the brand. Let me see it. Lila's blood ran cold. In here, in front of this man? But she had come this far. She turned, her hands shaking. She unbuttoned the collar of her dress, her fingers fumbling, and pulled the gray fabric aside, exposing her shoulder, exposing the ugly, puckered scar. She stood there, exposed, her back to him, waiting. Huh. Barrows grunted. He didn't move from his chair. Well, he really did it. Lila let out a shaky breath, pulling her dress back into place. She turned to face him, hope in her eyes. So you'll help me? Barrows laughed, a short, ugly bark. Help you? Girl. What do you think this is? That wire says you're $700 of Creed's property. Now, maybe he was rough, but you're a saloon girl. You knew the life. Women like you, he sneered, his voice dropping. You don't get justice. You get what you're paid for. Now, you've caused enough trouble. I want you and that man of yours out of my town by morning, or I'm wiring Creed myself and collecting that reward. The hope died, the coldness, the despair. It was all back. He was just like the preacher who had sold her. He was just like all of them. The law was just another man who would turn his back. I see, she whispered, her voice dead. She turned to go. The door of the office slammed open, crashing against the wall. Seth stood in the doorway. His face was white, his eyes burning with a cold, pure fury she had never seen. He had heard it. He had heard it all. Seth, no! Lila breathed. Barrows, startled, was halfway out of his chair. What the hell? This is a private... Seth didn't say a word. He didn't hesitate. He crossed the room in 2 long strides, grabbed the front of the sheriff's vest, and hit him. It was not a brawl. It was an execution, a single solid punch that landed with a sound like a wet axe splitting wood. It snapped the sheriff's head back, and Barrows went over his desk backward. A mess of papers, coffee, and limbs, crashing to the floor. Seth stood over him, trembling, his right hand split and bleeding. A deputy, who had been dozing in the corner, had his gun out. "Hold it! Hold it right there! Parker, get your hands up!" Seth slowly raised his hands. He didn't look at the deputy. He didn't look at the groaning sheriff. He looked at Lila. His face was still a mask of white-hot rage, but his eyes were full of a terrible, protective sorrow. "Don't you ever," Seth breathed, his voice shaking, "talk to her like that again." The deputy jammed the gun in his back. "You're done, Parker. You're done." They locked him in the back cell. Lila stood, frozen, as they dragged him away. She heard the heavy, iron clang of the cell door and the final, grinding sound of the key in the lock. She visited him that evening. The jail was cold, dark, and smelled of rust and despair. Seth was sitting on the thin cot, his head in his hands. His own hand was wrapped in a bloody rag. She stood at the bars, her heart aching. "They say they'll hold you for the circuit judge," she whispered. "Assaulting an officer. They say you'll get 5 years. Seth, why?" He looked up. His face was bruised from the deputy's handling, but his eyes were clear. "I told you, he had no right. But your freedom, your life." "What life?" he said, and stood. He walked to the bars, stopping so close she could feel the warmth of him. "Running, hiding, that's not a life. You were right." He reached through the bars, his hand cupping her cheek. Lila's tears, which had been frozen inside her, began to fall. She pressed her hand over his, trapping it against her face. "You're the only man," she whispered, her voice thick with a revelation that was both heartbreaking and beautiful. "Who ever got in trouble for me? Not with me." "Lila," he breathed, his thumb brushing her tears. "No, listen. All my life, men got in trouble with me. They'd fight over me, or gamble for me, or get drunk and tear up the saloon with me. But it was all about them, about their pride, about owning me. No one," she sobbed, pressing her face into his hand. "No one ever just stood up for me, just for me." He closed his eyes. He had nothing. He was in a cell. He was a wanted man. He had just thrown away his life. But holding her, he was not sorry. The bounty man limped into Willow Creek the next day. His leg was stiff, his knee wrapped in a filthy bandage. He was gaunt, his face twisted with pain and a simmering, vengeful hatred. He had followed them. He had heard about the telegram, and he had come. He didn't go to the sheriff. He went to the saloon. He laid $100 on the bar and bought a bottle. The saloon was quiet for a weekday. The townsfolk edgy. They were talking about the man in the jail. "You're talking about Seth Parker," the bounty man said, his voice carrying. The men turned. "You know him?" the bartender asked. "I know him." The bounty man spat. "He's a murderer. Shot a 17-year-old boy in Wyoming. There's a $1,000 reward for him, dead or alive. He's an animal." A murmur went through the room. $1,000. "Not only that," the bounty man said, taking a long drink. "He's a liar. I tracked him over the pass. Found him with that whore he's traveling with. I told him he was under arrest. And he shot me. In the back. Left me for dead." The lie was ugly. And it was effective. "And the woman?" a man asked. The bounty man laughed. "The woman? She's the worst of them. A saloon whore from Creed's. She's poison. Got that poor fool Parker wrapped around her finger. She's the one who gets men to do her killing for her. They're a plague, the two of them. And they're in your town." The news spread like fire in a dry prairie. It took less than an hour. The fear of a dangerous murderer in their jail, mixed with their pious, self-righteous judgment of Lila, was a potent combination. By nightfall, the mob had formed. It wasn't just men. It was women, too. The decent women of the town, clutching their shawls, their faces pinched with righteousness. They gathered outside the saloon, their husbands holding torches and rifles. "We don't want his kind here. Run him out. Run the whore out with him." Sheriff Barrows, his jaw a swollen, purple mass, looked out his window at the 50 angry faces. He was not going to risk his skin for the man who had hit him. They marched to the jail. "Get him out, Barrows, or we'll burn the jail down with him in it." Lila, from her attic window, watched them come. Her first instinct was to hide, to bar the door, to crawl under the bed. Run, hide, disappear. But she saw the torches. She heard their voices. They were going to kill him. They were going to drag him from that cell. She thought of Seth, his hand through the bars. She thought of him carrying her from the fire. She thought of him covering her scar with his hand. "You don't have to earn me. No more running." She walked out of her room. She walked down the stairs, past a terrified Mrs. Gable, and out the front door. She walked through the center of the mob. The men fell back, surprised, their faces twisted with hate and confusion. She walked through them, her head held high, until she reached the small set of wooden steps that led up to the jailhouse door. Beside it, stark and bare, was the town gallows. She climbed the 3 steps of the gallows platform. "Stop!" she yelled. Her voice, practiced in the laundry, cut through the angry murmur. The mob went silent. They stared at this strange, ragged woman with the short hair, standing on the gallows platform, bathed in their torchlight. "You want him?" she cried, her voice trembling but strong. "You want to hang a man? Then you should know who you're hanging, and you should know who I am." She looked at them, her eyes scanning the angry, fearful faces. "You call me a whore. You're right, I was. For 6 years. My name is Lila. I was sold to a man named Creed when I was 14 years old, by a preacher who said he was saving my soul." A woman in the front row gasped. "You want to know about Seth Parker? You call him a murderer? He killed a boy, yes. It was an accident, and it has haunted him every single day. He is a good man. He is a kind man. He is the only good man I have ever known." She was shaking now, the tears streaming down her face, but she did not stop. "And you want to know about me?" Her hands went to the collar of her dress. She did not hesitate. She unbuttoned it, pulled the fabric wide, and turned, showing them all the ugly, raised scar on her shoulder. "This is what that man Creed did to me. He branded me, like I was his cow. I ran. I nearly died on that mountain. I was starving, and I was freezing, and Seth found me. He saved me. He clothed me. He protected me. He never, not once, laid a hand on me in violence. He treated me like I was worth something." She turned back to them, her face a mask of tears and defiance, her scar bared to the world. "He is in that jail because he hit your sheriff, and he hit your sheriff because that man told me I was a whore who didn't deserve justice. Seth is in there, for me. So if you want to hang someone, if you want to pull that rope, you hang me, because I am the one you hate. I am the runaway. I am the whore. But I am not ashamed. Not anymore." She stood there, shaking, weeping, her scar exposed, and she waited. The silence was absolute. The torches flickered. No one moved. The righteous anger of the mob had been broken, shattered by the truth. A woman at the front, Mrs. Gable, the boarding house owner, pushed her way forward. Her own face was wet with tears. She walked up the steps and took the wool shawl from her own shoulders. She wrapped it, gently, around Lila, covering her brand, covering her shame. "God forgive us, child," the widow whispered. A man in a dark coat, the town's preacher, stepped forward. "I know that pass," he said, his voice loud. "I know the ruins of the old chapel. It is a place of hardship, but the house of God, even in ashes, is a place of forgiveness. This woman, she has sought refuge." And we gave her judgment. The men began to lower their torches. They looked at their feet. They looked at each other, their faces no longer angry, but ashamed. The bounty man was furious. "She's lying! It's a trick! She's a thief!" "Speaking of thieves," a new voice called out. The general store owner pushed through the crowd, dragging the bounty man's saddlebags. "Sheriff, "I found him. He was sneaking out of my store. He had my cash box." The bounty man, exposed, tried to limp away, but 2 men grabbed him. Sheriff Barrows had watched the whole thing from his window. His jaw was purple. His pride was ruined. And now his entire town was on the side of the whore and the gunman. He stalked out of his office, rubbing his bruised jaw. He looked at Lila, his eyes full of a grudging, bitter respect. He looked at the bounty man, now held fast. "Well," Barrows spat, "looks like we found our real problem." He snatched the keys from his belt and stalked to Seth's cell. He unlocked the door. "Get out, Parker," he grunted. Seth walked out, his eyes finding Lila. She was still on the gallows steps, wrapped in the widow's shawl. "And get out of my town," Barrows said. "I want you both gone by sunup." Seth didn't look at the sheriff. He walked to the gallows, up the steps, and put his arms around Lila. She collapsed against him, her strength finally gone. "It's all right," he whispered, holding her tight. "You're safe. I've got you." They did not leave by sunup. They left a month later. They left on 2 mules, bought with the money Seth had earned mending every harness, every boot, every broken chair in Willow Creek. The town, in its shame, had given him work. Mrs. Gable had given Lila her shawl. They did not go south. They did not go north. They went back up the mountain. The pass was clear. The snow was gone. The world was a riot of green. The spring they had waited for was finally here. They rode to the place where the chapel had been. It was gone. The fire had been total. All that remained was a foundation of scorched, blackened stones and a pile of charcoal. It was a grave, but the mountain was alive. Bluebells and wild onion were pushing up through the ash. Seth got off his mule. He went to the other and unstrapped a long, heavy piece of wood. It was a new crossbeam, cut and planed by his own hands. He walked to the foundation, and with a grunt, he set the beam across the stones. It was the first piece of a new home, a new start. Lila slid off her mule. She was carrying a small cloth sack. She walked to the center of the ruins, where their fire had been. She knelt in the ashes. She opened the sack, and with her raw, laundry-scalded hands, she began to plant wildflower seeds. She was planting life in the place of their death. Seth came and knelt beside her. He didn't say anything. He just took her hands in his. They were no longer the hunted. They were no longer the damned. They were just Seth and Lila. He leaned in, and she met him halfway. They kissed, there among the ashes. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss of the forest. It was not the reverent, sacred kiss of their first night. It was a kiss of quiet peace. It was slow, and it was deep, and it tasted of wood smoke and wildflowers. It was not survival. It was resurrection. Thank you for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from, so please drop a comment and let me know. Be sure to subscribe to From Wild West for more stories like this one, and share your thoughts about Seth and Lila.